Elena's hands trembled as the drums stopped. Something was wrong. She could feel it in the air, thick and heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks over the mountains. The entire pack had gathered in the ceremonial grove, hundreds of eyes fixed on her, and yet Damon was not looking at her at all. She stood in her white dress beneath the old oak trees, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure the wolves nearest to her could hear it. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. She had waited for this moment since she was a girl, dreaming of the day she would stand before her pack and become Luna, the mate of the Alpha, the woman who would lead beside him. But Damon was late, and when he finally appeared at the edge of the grove, he did not walk toward her. He walked toward someone else. A murmur spread through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Elena followed the direction of every gaze and found the source of the sudden tension. Vanessa stood among the guests, wrapped in a deep red dress that seemed almost mocking against the white flowers strung through the branches above. Vanessa was the daughter of the Alpha from the neighboring territory, a woman Elena had met only twice, always with a strange smile that never quite reached her eyes. Damon stopped in the middle of the grove. He did not come to Elena. He did not explain. He simply turned to face the crowd, his jaw tight, his eyes finally meeting Elena's for the briefest second, before sliding away again. "I cannot do this," he said. The words hit Elena like a blow to the chest. For a moment, she could not breathe. She thought she had misheard him, that the wind had twisted his voice into something cruel. But the silence that followed confirmed it. Everyone had heard the same thing. Damon. Her voice cracked as she said his name. "What are you saying?" He did not answer her directly. Instead, he looked past her shoulder, toward Vanessa, and something in his face softened in a way it had never softened for Elena, not once in the 3 years they had been together. "I have found my true mate," Damon announced, his voice growing louder, meant for the whole pack to hear. "The bond chose Vanessa. I did not ask for this, but I cannot deny what my wolf knows to be true." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Elena felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. She reached for the nearest post of the flowered arch to steady herself, her fingers digging into the wood so hard that a splinter pierced her skin. She barely noticed the pain. It was nothing compared to what was happening inside her chest. "You are rejecting me," Elena whispered. In front of everyone. Damon's silence was answer enough. He did not deny it. He simply stood there, tall and broad-shouldered in his ceremonial coat, the same coat he had promised to wear only for her, and let the truth settle over the grove like a suffocating fog. Elena's mother rushed forward, her face pale with horror, but Elena raised a hand to stop her before she could reach the altar. She needed a moment, just one moment to understand what was happening to the life she had built her entire future around. Whispers grew into open conversation as pack members began to speak among themselves, some in shock, some already turning their attention toward Vanessa with a strange kind of respect, as if a rejection performed so publicly somehow proved the strength of the new bond. Elena felt every one of those glances like a blade. She had spent years earning the trust of this pack, training beside their warriors, learning their histories, preparing herself to become their Luna, and now, in the space of a few sentences, she had become nothing more than a woman left behind. Vanessa stepped forward at last, moving through the crowd with the calm confidence of someone who had expected this outcome all along. She did not look at Elena with pity. She did not look at her with guilt. She simply walked to Damon's side and slipped her hand into his, claiming her place as though it had always belonged to her. "I am sorry it happened this way," Vanessa said, though her tone carried no real sorrow at all. "But fate does not wait for convenient timing." Elena wanted to scream. She wanted to demand answers, to ask how long this had been happening, whether the meetings between the two packs over the past months had been nothing more than a cover for betrayal. But her throat felt tight, as if an invisible hand had wrapped itself around her windpipe. All she could do was stand there in her white dress, flowers wilting in her hair, while the man she had trusted completely chose another woman in front of everyone she knew. Her wolf stirred inside her, howling with a grief so deep it felt like drowning. She fought to keep her human form, knowing that if she shifted now, in front of the entire pack, it would only add humiliation to heartbreak. She pressed her nails into her palms and forced herself to breathe. "Why?" she finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper, though it carried across the silent grove. Why let me stand here and wait? Why not tell me before this moment? Damon's expression flickered with something that might have been guilt, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. I did not know until recently, he said. The bond revealed itself slowly. I did not want to hurt you. You did not want to hurt me, Elena repeated, disbelief sharpening her voice. And yet here we are. A few pack members shifted uncomfortably, clearly uneasy with how the scene was unfolding, but none of them stepped forward to defend her. Elena searched the crowd for a single face that showed real outrage on her behalf, someone who might stand beside her in this moment of ruin. She found sympathy in a few eyes, quiet and fleeting, but no one moved. No one spoke against their alpha. Loyalty to Damon ran deeper than loyalty to her, and she understood, with a bitter clarity, that she had never truly belonged here the way she believed she had. Elena's father placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice low and urgent. Come away from here, he said. You do not need to stand through this. But something in Elena refused to move just yet. She lifted her chin, forcing herself to look directly at Damon and Vanessa, refusing to let them see her collapse before she chose to leave on her own terms. Her eyes burned, but she did not let the tears fall. Not here. Not in front of the pack that had just watched her be discarded like something unwanted. I hope your bond brings you everything you believe it will, Elena said, her voice steadier now, though it cost her everything to keep it that way. But I will not stand here and beg for a place I no longer want. She turned before Damon could respond, gathering the edges of her white dress in her fists as she walked away from the altar, away from the flowers, away from the life she had spent years imagining. Every step felt like walking through water, heavy and slow, but she did not stop, and she did not look back. Behind her, she could hear the pack beginning to murmur again, already shifting their attention toward the new alpha pairing standing at the front of the grove. It struck her how quickly the world moved on, how easily an entire community could witness the destruction of someone's future and then simply continue with their day. Elena did not go far. She could not bring herself to run. Not yet. Not while so many eyes might still be watching. Instead, she walked with as much dignity as she could hold together, past the rows of chairs, past the flowered arches, past the faces of people who had once called themselves her friends. Her mother followed close behind, murmuring soft words that Elena could barely hear over the ringing in her own ears. Only when she reached the edge of the trees, far enough from the grove that the drums and voices faded into a low hum, did Elena finally let herself stop. She pressed her back against the trunk of an old pine and slid down until she was sitting in the dirt, her beautiful dress crumpling around her, forgotten. Her mother knelt beside her, reaching for her hand, but Elena pulled away. She needed a moment that belonged to no one but herself. The tears came then, hot and relentless, and she let them fall freely, now that there was no one left to witness her breaking apart. Her wolf howled inside her, a sound of pure anguish that vibrated through every part of her being, mourning the loss of a bond she had believed was real, mourning the humiliation that would follow her for the rest of her life within these pack lands. She thought of the years she had spent by Damon's side, the quiet mornings when they trained together before the rest of the pack woke, the nights he had promised her a future built on partnership and respect. All of it now felt like a story someone else had told her, a story that had never truly been about her at all. Somewhere in the distance, she could still hear the faint sound of celebration drifting from the grove, laughter rising as though nothing had happened, as though her heart had not just been shattered in front of everyone she had ever trusted. The sound of it cut deeper than anything Damon had said. Elena wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing the careful makeup that had been applied so lovingly that morning by her sister. She looked down at her white dress, once a symbol of hope, now stained with dirt and tears, and something inside her shifted. The grief was still there, raw and enormous, but beneath it, something else was beginning to stir, a quiet, burning refusal to let this moment define the rest of her life. She did not yet know what she would do. She did not know where she would go, or how she would rebuild a future that had just been torn apart in front of an entire pack. But she knew, with a certainty that surprised her even through her sorrow, that she would not stay here and watch Damon and Vanessa build the life that was supposed to have been hers. The sun began to sink lower behind the trees, casting long shadows across the forest floor, and Elena remained there a while longer, letting the last of her tears fall in private, before she found the strength to stand. Whatever came next, she would face it without the man who had promised to stand beside her forever. She rose slowly, brushing the dirt from her dress, and looked back one final time toward the distant sound of the celebration she would never be part of again. Something in her chest, beneath the pain, felt strangely like the beginning of freedom. The days that followed felt like walking through a fog that never lifted. Elena moved through her family home in silence, barely eating, barely sleeping, while the pack outside continued its business as though nothing had changed. But everything had changed. She could feel it every time she stepped outside and caught the sideways glances of neighbors who no longer knew how to look at her. Word of what happened at the ceremonial grove spread through the territory faster than any storm. By the second day, everyone knew the story, though the details shifted depending on who was telling it. Some said Elena had failed to satisfy the bond between herself and Damon. Others whispered that she had known about Vanessa for months and simply refused to step aside gracefully. None of the stories were true, but Elena found she no longer had the strength to correct them. Her mother tried to comfort her in the only way she knew how, bringing tea to her room each morning, sitting quietly beside her, even when Elena had nothing to say. Her father, a proud man who had served the pack for decades, struggled more visibly with his daughter's humiliation. He paced the halls of their home with his jaw clenched, muttering about honor and duty, though he never once suggested confronting Damon directly. No one confronted Damon. He was still the alpha, and even a public betrayal could not undo the authority the pack had granted him. On the third day, Elena's older sister, Marisol, arrived from the eastern border where she had been living with her own mate. She swept into the house with fierce energy, wrapping Elena in a tight embrace the moment she saw her. "I came as soon as I heard," Marisol said, pulling back to study Elena's face with worried eyes. "Tell me everything." Elena recounted the events at the Grove in a flat, exhausted voice, as though describing something that had happened to a stranger rather than herself. Marisol's expression darkened with every word, her hands curling into fists at her sides. "He humiliated you in front of the entire pack," Marisol said when Elena finished. "And no one said anything? No one stood up for you?" "They are loyal to him," Elena said simply. "He is their alpha. I am no one to them now." "You are not no one," Marisol said fiercely. "You have given years of your life to this pack. You trained beside their warriors. You helped negotiate peace with 3 neighboring territories. That means something." Elena appreciated her sister's anger, but it did little to ease the ache that had settled permanently in her chest. She had heard variations of these arguments from her mother, from a few close friends who had dared to visit, and each time the words felt hollow against the reality of what she had experienced. The pack had watched her be discarded, and the pack had done nothing. That evening, Elena's father called a small family meeting, gathering Elena, her mother, and Marisol around the kitchen table. His expression was grave, the kind of look he usually reserved for matters of pack politics rather than family affairs. "I have spoken with a few of the elders," he said carefully. "There is a suggestion being discussed, one that might help repair your position within the pack." Elena felt a familiar tightness return to her chest. "What kind of suggestion?" Her father hesitated before answering. "There is an opening within the pack's council for an advisory role, working beneath Damon and Vanessa. It would not carry the same status as Luna, but it would allow you to remain in a position of respect." The words landed like another blow. Elena stared at her father, disbelief washing over her. "You want me to work beneath the woman who took my place? To watch them build the life that was supposed to be mine, every single day?" "It is a practical solution," her father said, though his voice lacked conviction. "It would allow you to keep your standing, your home, your connections within the pack. It would allow me to be reminded of my humiliation every single day for the rest of my life," Elena said, her voice rising for the first time since the wedding. "I will not do that. I will not shrink myself into whatever small space they are willing to give me, just so I can stay in a place that has already shown me exactly how little I mean to them." Her mother reached across the table, placing a gentle hand over Elena's. "No one is asking you to shrink yourself, sweetheart. We only want you to have security. This pack is your home." "This pack watched me be discarded and said nothing," Elena said, pulling her hand back gently but firmly. "I do not think I can call that home anymore." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Marisol was the first to speak again, her voice softer now, though no less determined. "What do you want to do, Elena? Not what is practical, not what keeps the peace. What do you actually want?" Elena considered the question carefully, turning it over in her mind as though searching for an answer she had been avoiding since the moment Damon spoke those devastating words in the grove. The truth, when it finally surfaced, surprised even her. "I want to leave," she said quietly. "I do not want to spend the rest of my life as a footnote in someone else's story. I do not want to watch Damon and Vanessa lead this pack while everyone remembers me as the woman who was left behind. I want to find out who I am outside of all of this." Her father's face tightened with concern. "Leaving the pack is not a small decision, Elena. You would be giving up your protection, your status, everything you have known since birth. The world beyond our borders is not kind to lone wolves." "I understand the risks," Elena said, and she meant it. She had grown up hearing stories of the dangers that waited outside pack territories, rogue wolves who preyed on the unprotected, rival packs who saw lone travelers as easy targets or valuable bargaining pieces. But even those dangers felt more bearable than the certainty of staying here, trapped in a role designed to remind her, every single day, of everything she had lost. Marisol reached across the table and took Elena's hand again, her grip firm and reassuring. "If this is truly what you want, I will support you, but you do not have to decide tonight. Give yourself time to think it through clearly, without the weight of what happened still fresh in your mind." Elena nodded, grateful for her sister's steady presence, though she already sensed the decision had been made somewhere deep inside her the moment she walked away from the ceremonial grove 3 days earlier. Over the following week, Elena tried to follow her sister's advice, giving herself space to consider every angle of the choice before her. She avoided the center of the pack's territory as much as possible, unwilling to risk another encounter with Damon or Vanessa, who seemed to be settling into their new roles with unsettling speed. She heard through quiet conversations that preparations were already underway for a proper bonding ceremony between the two of them, one that would take place within the month. The news should not have surprised her, yet it still struck like a fresh wound each time she heard it mentioned. She began to notice how differently people treated her now. Pack members who once greeted her warmly now offered only brief, awkward nods before hurrying past. Some avoided her gaze entirely, as though her presence reminded them of an uncomfortable truth about their alpha's character. A few, worse still, seemed to view her with something close to contempt, as if her failure to secure Damon's loyalty were somehow a mark against her own worth. The isolation deepened her resolve. Each dismissive glance, each hurried conversation cut short when she approached, reminded her that whatever home she believed she had built here had already crumbled long before the wedding day. She had simply been too focused on her own future to notice the cracks forming beneath her feet. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after the wedding that never happened, Elena found herself standing at the edge of the training grounds where she had once practiced alongside Damon and the other warriors. The space was empty now, the sun setting behind the distant tree line, painting the sky in shades of orange and deep purple. She remembered the morning she had spent here, sparring with Damon, laughing when he teased her about her footwork, feeling for the first time in her life like she truly belonged somewhere. All of that felt like a different lifetime now. She closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel the full weight of her grief one final time, letting it wash over her completely, before she pushed it down and made room for something new. When she opened her eyes again, the sky had darkened further, stars beginning to appear scattered across the horizon. She made her decision that night, standing alone at the edge of the training grounds where her old life had once felt so certain. She would leave, not out of anger, though anger still burned within her, and not simply to escape the humiliation that clung to her within these borders. She would leave because she deserved a chance to build a future that belonged entirely to herself, free from the shadow of a rejection that had defined her for weeks. The following morning, she told her family of her decision. Her father argued gently, though with less conviction than before, understanding perhaps that Elena's mind had already been made up. Her mother cried quietly, holding her daughter close for a long moment, before finally nodding in reluctant acceptance. Marisol, true to her word, offered no resistance at all, only practical advice about routes, supplies, and the dangers Elena might face beyond the pack's protected borders. That night, Elena packed a small bag with only what she truly needed, leaving behind the dresses and belongings that reminded her too much of the life she was choosing to release. She held on to a few precious items, a pendant from her grandmother, a worn photograph of her family, and little else. Everything about the process felt strangely freeing, as though she were shedding a skin that no longer fit the person she was becoming. She said her goodbyes quietly, unwilling to draw attention from the rest of the pack, unwilling to give Damon or Vanessa the satisfaction of witnessing her departure. As dawn broke on the day she planned to leave, Elena stood at the edge of the territory boundary, looking back one final time at the only home she had ever known. Fear coiled tightly in her stomach, but beneath it, something steadier had taken root. For the first time since the wedding, she felt something other than grief. She felt the faint, fragile beginning of hope, uncertain but undeniably present, guiding her toward whatever waited beyond the borders of everything familiar. She turned away from the packlands and stepped into the unknown, leaving behind the wreckage of the life she had planned, ready to discover the one that truly belonged to her. The forest beyond the pack borders felt like an entirely different world. Elena had grown up surrounded by the familiar paths and landmarks of her home territory, every tree and stream known to her since childhood. Now, walking alone through unmarked woods, she felt the full weight of her isolation settle over her like a heavy cloak. She traveled south at first, following an old trail her father had once mentioned during stories of his own youthful adventures before he settled into pack life. The path wound through dense forest, past rivers swollen from recent rains, and over rocky hills that tested her endurance in ways she had not expected. She had trained as a warrior within her pack, sparring and running drills alongside Damon and the others, but nothing had prepared her for the exhaustion of constant travel without the safety net of a home to return to each night. The first few days passed in a strange blur of determination and fear. Elena kept careful watch of her surroundings, avoiding the well-traveled roads that connected the larger pack territories, choosing instead to move through less populated stretches of wilderness where she was less likely to encounter trouble. She hunted small game to sustain herself, grateful for the skills her father had insisted she learn even after she began her formal training as a future Luna. At night, she found shelter wherever she could, sometimes beneath the low branches of ancient trees, other times within small caves carved into hillsides by centuries of wind and rain. Sleep came slowly and never fully, her senses remaining alert even in exhaustion, listening for any sound that might signal danger approaching through the darkness. It was on the 5th night of her journey that Elena first sensed she was being watched. She had made camp near a shallow stream, the sound of running water, usually a comfort against the silence of the forest. But as the moon rose higher, she felt a prickling awareness along the back of her neck, the unmistakable sensation of eyes fixed upon her from somewhere within the trees. Her wolf stirred immediately, senses sharpening, muscles tensing in preparation. She rose slowly from where she had been sitting, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. For a long moment, nothing stirred. Then, from the shadows between two large pines, a pair of eyes reflected the moonlight, low to the ground, unmistakably belonging to a wolf. Elena's heart pounded as she assessed the situation. A lone wolf traveling through unclaimed territory was vulnerable to many things, and rogue wolves who had been cast out of their own packs, or who had never belonged to one at all, were among the most dangerous threats she might encounter. Unbound by pack law, they answered to no alpha, followed no code of conduct, and often preyed on travelers foolish enough to wander through their claimed hunting grounds alone. "I do not want trouble," Elena called out, keeping her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I am only passing through." The eyes in the darkness did not retreat. Instead, a low growl rumbled through the trees, and the shape of a large wolf emerged fully into the moonlight, fur matted and scarred, eyes wild with something that looked less like hunger and more like territorial fury. Elena did not wait to see whether diplomacy would work. She shifted instantly, her human form dissolving into the powerful, sleek shape of her wolf, senses expanding as fur replaced skin. The rogue wolf lunged the moment she completed her transformation, and Elena barely managed to dodge aside, feeling the rush of air as sharp teeth snapped shut inches from where her throat had been only a moment before. The fight that followed was brutal and fast. Elena had trained for years, but she had never fought for her life against an opponent with nothing left to lose. The rogue wolf moved with a desperate, reckless aggression that made him unpredictable, striking from angles she did not expect, forcing her onto the defensive again and again. She managed to land a solid blow against his shoulder, driving him back with a pained yelp, but he recovered quickly, circling her with renewed determination. Elena's breath came in ragged gasps, her muscles burning with the effort of the fight, when the rogue wolf finally found an opening and sank his teeth into her side. Pain exploded through her body, sharp and blinding, but instinct took over, where conscious thought failed. She twisted violently, breaking free of his grip, despite the tearing pain, and drove her own teeth into his exposed neck, with every remaining ounce of strength she possessed. The rogue wolf let out a final, choked howl before collapsing, defeated, and finally retreating into the darkness of the forest, wounded but alive. Elena did not have the strength to celebrate her survival. The moment the immediate threat passed, the full weight of her injury crashed over her, and she felt her legs give out beneath her. She shifted back to her human form on pure instinct, hoping the change might slow the bleeding, and pressed a shaking hand against the wound at her side. Blood seeped between her fingers, warm and frightening in the cold night air. She knew she needed help, and quickly. Alone in unfamiliar territory, injured and far from any pack she could call for aid, Elena understood with a chilling clarity that this could be the moment her journey ended entirely. She forced herself to stand, stumbling forward through the trees on legs that threatened to buckle with every step, following the sound of rushing water in the hope that a stream might lead her toward some sign of civilization. She did not know how long she walked, only that the pain grew sharper with each passing minute, and her vision began to blur at the edges. She stumbled over roots and loose stones, catching herself against tree trunks whenever her balance failed, refusing to give in to the darkness threatening to pull her under. Just as her strength finally began to fail completely, Elena caught the unmistakable scent of another wolf, strong and unfamiliar, carried on the night breeze. Fear and hope warred within her in equal measure. She had no way of knowing whether this new presence meant safety or further danger, but she no longer had the strength to run, or to fight, or to do anything but continue stumbling forward and hope for mercy. She broke through a line of dense brush into a small clearing and collapsed to her knees, the last of her strength finally spent. Above her, she was dimly aware of a large shape moving closer through the darkness, cautious but deliberate, and she braced herself for whatever might come next. "Stay still," a deep voice commanded, low and steady, carrying an authority that Elena's exhausted mind recognized instantly as belonging to someone accustomed to being obeyed. "You are bleeding badly." Elena tried to lift her head, tried to find the source of the voice, but her vision had narrowed to a blur of shifting shadows. She felt strong arms catch her before she collapsed completely against the forest floor, lifting her with surprising gentleness, despite the urgency in his movements. "Who are you?" she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible even to her own ears. "Someone who is not going to let you die in my territory," the voice answered, and though the words carried a strange edge of irritation, there was no cruelty in them. "Hold on." Elena wanted to ask more questions, wanted to understand where she was being taken and by whom, but the darkness finally claimed her before she could form the words. Her last conscious thought was the sensation of being carried swiftly through the forest, cradled against a broad chest that radiated warmth and unexpected steadiness, toward a destination she could not begin to guess. When awareness returned to her slowly, Elena found herself lying on a soft bed within an unfamiliar room, sunlight filtering through wooden shutters onto polished floors. The pain at her side had dulled to a persistent ache, and when she glanced down, she found the wound had been carefully cleaned and bandaged, the work of someone with considerable skill in healing. Her mind raced through fragmented memories of the previous night, the fight with the rogue wolf, the desperate walk through the forest, and finally, the deep voice that had promised she would not die in his territory. She pushed herself upright carefully, testing the strength of her injured side, and found the room around her, simple but well kept, clearly belonging to someone of importance within whatever pack now surrounded her. The door opened before she could gather her thoughts further, and an older woman entered, carrying a tray of food and water, her expression softening with relief the moment she saw Elena awake and sitting upright. "You gave us quite a scare," the woman said, setting the tray down on a small table beside the bed. "You lost a great deal of blood. It is fortunate our Alpha found you when he did." Elena's pulse quickened at the mention of an Alpha, memories of her own recent humiliation still raw beneath the surface. "Where am I?" she asked carefully. "Whose territory is this?" "You are within the lands of the Ashwood Pack," the woman answered, studying Elena with curious, kind eyes. "And you have our Alpha Kale to thank for your life. He rarely brings strangers into our territory, let alone tends to their wounds himself." Elena absorbed this information slowly, uncertain what to make of it. She had heard of the Ashwood Pack before, though only in passing mentions, during Pack Council discussions. A smaller territory known for keeping largely to itself, avoiding the political entanglements that consumed larger packs like the one she had left behind. She had never expected to find herself recovering within its borders, saved by an Alpha whose name she had barely known before that night. "Thank you," Elena said finally, meaning it with a sincerity that surprised her. "I do not know what would have happened to me otherwise." The older woman smiled gently, though something guarded remained in her expression, a natural wariness toward an outsider suddenly present within their protected lands. "Rest now. You will need your strength before you can think about anything else." "There will be time enough for questions later." Elena nodded, though her mind continued to race even as exhaustion pulled at her once more. She thought of the Alpha who had carried her through the forest, whose voice had carried such quiet authority, despite the strangeness of the situation. She wondered what kind of leader would go out of his way to save an injured stranger found bleeding at the edge of his territory, and what price, if any, such kindness might eventually demand. For now, though, safety was enough. She allowed herself to sink back against the pillows, the persistent ache in her side a small price to pay for having survived the first true test of her journey. Whatever waited for her within the Ashwood Pack, she would face it once her strength returned, carrying forward the same determination that had carried her this far already. Sleep claimed her again quickly, deep and dreamless this time, the safety of unfamiliar walls somehow more comforting than the uncertain wilderness she had left behind. Elena woke again as evening light spilled through the wooden shutters, painting the room in shades of amber and gold. Her side still ached, though the pain had dulled considerably since the previous day, and she found she could sit upright without the room spinning around her. She spent a long moment simply breathing, grateful for the steadiness returning to her body, before the door opened and a man stepped inside who she immediately understood to be the Alpha the older woman had spoken of. He was tall, broader through the shoulders than most men she had known, with dark hair that fell slightly across a face marked by a quiet intensity. His eyes, a striking shade of gray, studied her with careful assessment rather than open curiosity, as though he were still deciding what to make of the stranger he had brought into his home. "You are awake," he said, his voice the same deep, steady tone she remembered from the forest. "Good. I was beginning to think that wound had taken more out of you than I realized." "You are Kale," Elena said, more statement than question. "The Alpha of this pack." He inclined his head slightly, though his expression remained guarded. "And you are a stranger who nearly bled to death at the edge of my territory. I would like to know your name, at the very least, before deciding what to do with you." There was no cruelty in his words, only a blunt practicality that Elena found strangely refreshing after weeks of careful, pitying conversations back home. "Elena," she offered, "and I am grateful for what you did. I do not know how to properly thank you for saving my life." Kale crossed his arms, leaning slightly against the doorframe as he studied her further. "You can thank me by explaining what a lone traveler was doing fighting a rogue wolf in unclaimed territory at night. That is not a common occurrence, even for warriors far more experienced than you appear to be." Elena hesitated, uncertain how much of her story she wanted to share with a stranger, even one who had shown her such unexpected kindness. She settled on a version of the truth that omitted the more painful details. "I left my pack," she said simply. "I am traveling alone, trying to find a new place to build a life for myself. I did not expect trouble so soon into the journey." Something flickered across Kale's face, an expression she could not quite read, gone before she could analyze it further. Leaving a pack is not a decision most wolves make lightly, he said. There must have been a significant reason. There was, Elena said, her voice quieter now, the memory of that day at the ceremonial grove still tender beneath the surface. But I would rather not discuss it further, if that is acceptable. Cale studied her for a long moment, and Elena braced herself for further questions, prepared to defend her right to privacy if necessary. Instead, he simply nodded, a flicker of something like respect passing behind his gray eyes. That is your right, he said. I will not press you for details you are not ready to share. The response surprised her, and something in her chest loosened slightly. The tension she had been carrying since her arrival, easing by a small but noticeable degree. Thank you, she said again, meaning it more deeply this time. You will need to remain here until your wound has fully healed, Cale continued, his tone shifting back to practical matters. My healer will check on you daily. Once you are strong enough, we can discuss your plans for continuing your journey, or whatever arrangement suits you best. I do not want to be a burden, Elena said quickly. I can leave as soon as I am able to travel safely. Cale's expression remained unreadable, though something in his posture shifted slightly, a subtle softening that Elena might have missed had she not been watching closely. You are not a burden, he said. Ashwood territory is not so wealthy in resources that we turn away those in need without cause. You will stay until you are healed, and we will discuss the rest afterward. He left the room shortly after, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts and a strange, unfamiliar sense of relief. She had expected wariness from an unfamiliar alpha, perhaps even suspicion regarding her sudden appearance within his territory. Instead, she had found a guarded but genuine kindness, offered without expectation of anything in return. Over the following days, Elena's strength returned steadily under the careful attention of the pack's healer, a patient woman named Odalise, who tended to Elena's wound with practiced skill and quiet conversation that gradually put Elena at ease within the unfamiliar surroundings. She learned, through these conversations, that the Ashwood pack was considerably smaller than the one she had left behind, its territory modest but well protected, its people fiercely loyal to an alpha who had led them through difficult years with quiet, steady determination. Cale does not often show kindness to outsiders, Odalise mentioned one afternoon, while changing the bandages at Elena's side. You should consider yourself fortunate that he found you when he did, and fortunate still that he chose to bring you here rather than simply pointing you toward the nearest settlement. Why do you think he helped me? Elena asked, curious despite herself. Odalise considered the question carefully before answering. Our alpha carries more compassion than he lets most people see. He simply prefers to keep it well hidden, for reasons that are not mine to share. The comment lingered in Elena's mind, long after Odalise left the room, adding another layer of curiosity to the quiet mystery surrounding the Ashwood alpha. She found herself thinking of him often during the slow hours of her recovery, replaying the steady confidence of his voice in the forest, the careful way he had studied her without judgment when she refused to share the full story of her departure from her old pack. By the end of the first week, Elena's wound had healed enough that she could move around the small house without significant pain, though Odalise still cautioned her against overexertion. Restless with her recovery, Elena began venturing outside during the quieter hours of the day, exploring the edges of the Ashwood territory, while remaining careful not to intrude too deeply into areas that might not welcome an outsider's presence. It was during one of these walks that she encountered Cale again, standing at the edge of a training field where several pack warriors practiced their combat forms under the afternoon sun. He noticed her approach immediately, his sharp senses alerting him before she had even fully crossed the distance between them. You should not be out here unsupervised, he said, though his tone carried more concern than reprimand. Your wound is still healing. I am simply walking, Elena said, a hint of defensiveness creeping into her voice despite her best efforts to remain polite. I have spent enough time confined to that room. I needed fresh air. Cale studied her for a moment, something almost like amusement flickering behind his guarded expression. You do not strike me as someone who enjoys being confined to anything. You would be correct, Elena said, allowing herself a small, genuine smile for what felt like the first time in weeks. I have never been particularly good at sitting still and waiting for others to decide what happens to me. Something shifted subtly in Kale's expression at her words, though Elena could not quite identify what it meant. "That is a useful trait to have," he said finally, "though it can also be dangerous, depending on the circumstances." They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the warriors practice their forms across the field. Elena found herself studying the movements with genuine interest, noting techniques she recognized from her own training and others entirely unfamiliar to her. "You fight well," Kale observed suddenly, catching her off guard. "The wound you took from that rogue wolf was severe, yet you still managed to drive him off rather than simply falling prey to him. That takes considerable skill and determination." "I trained for years within my old pack," Elena admitted, though clearly not enough to avoid nearly dying in a forest at night. "No training fully prepares you for a desperate opponent with nothing left to lose," Kale said, his voice carrying a weight that suggested personal experience with such battles. "You survived. That is what matters." Elena glanced at him curiously, wondering what history lay behind the quiet authority in his words. But she did not press for further explanation, mindful of the same boundary he had respected with her only days earlier. "Would you allow me to train with your warriors?" Elena asked instead, the question surprising even herself as it left her mouth. "Once I am fully healed, of course. I do not wish to remain idle while I decide my next steps." Kale considered the request for a long moment, his gray eyes studying her with renewed interest. "That can be arranged," he said finally, "though I will warn you, my warriors do not go easy on anyone, regardless of their history or their reasons for being here." "Good," Elena said, feeling something steady and determined settle within her chest, for the first time since the disaster of her wedding day. "I would not want it any other way." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of Kale's mouth before he turned back toward the training field, leaving Elena standing there with a strange, unfamiliar warmth blooming quietly within her chest, one she was not yet ready to examine too closely. 2 more weeks passed before Odalise finally declared Elena fully healed, the wound at her side reduced to a thin, silvery scar that would fade further with time. True to his word, Kale arranged for her to join the pack's warriors during their morning training sessions, and Elena threw herself into the routine with a hunger that surprised even her. The Ashwood warriors were skilled, disciplined, and initially wary of the outsider who had suddenly appeared among them. Elena understood their caution and did not try to force her way into their trust. Instead, she simply showed up each morning, worked harder than anyone expected, and let her actions speak louder than any words could have managed. A young warrior named Rowan became the first to warm to her presence, impressed by her quick reflexes and the sharp, strategic way she analyzed her opponents during sparring matches. "You fight like someone who has something to prove," he commented one morning, after Elena had successfully countered a move that had caught most newcomers off guard. "Maybe I do," Elena admitted, wiping sweat from her brow as she caught her breath. Whatever it is working," Rowan said with a grin. "You have earned some respect around here already, and that does not happen quickly with this group." Elena found herself smiling more often during these weeks than she had in months, the physical exertion of training providing a welcome outlet for the emotions she still carried from her old life. She rarely allowed herself to think of Damon or Vanessa anymore, though occasional memories still surfaced unexpectedly, usually late at night when the training grounds fell silent, and she was left alone with her thoughts. Kale observed her progress from a careful distance during those early weeks, rarely joining the training sessions directly, but often watching from the edge of the field, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Elena noticed his presence each time, though she never mentioned it, curious about the quiet interest he seemed to take in her development, without fully understanding what motivated it. It was during a particularly grueling session, nearly a month after her arrival, that Kale finally stepped onto the training field himself, drawing the attention of every warrior present. "I would like to see how our newest addition handles herself against someone with actual experience," he announced, his gray eyes settling on Elena with an intensity that made her pulse quicken for reasons she could not fully explain. A murmur of surprise passed through the gathered warriors. Elena understood immediately that this was no small request. An alpha rarely engaged in casual sparring, and the fact that Kale had chosen her specifically carried a weight she could not ignore. "I would be honored," Elena said, stepping forward despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. They faced each other across the training field, the other warriors forming a loose circle around them, clearly eager to witness the match. Elena studied Kale's stance carefully, noting the relaxed confidence in his posture, the way he held himself like someone who had faced countless opponents and never once doubted the outcome. "Do not hold back," Kale said quietly, just before the match began. "I want to see what you are truly capable of." Elena nodded, steadying her breathing as she prepared herself. The moment the signal was given, Kale moved with a speed that caught her off guard despite her preparation, closing the distance between them in a heartbeat. She managed to dodge his first strike, though barely, twisting aside just in time to avoid a blow that would have ended the match immediately. The fight that followed pushed Elena harder than any training session she had experienced since arriving in Ashwood territory. Kale fought with a controlled, calculated precision that revealed years of experience and discipline, each movement deliberate, each strike carrying enough power to remind her exactly why he held the position of alpha. Elena drew on every technique she had learned, adapting quickly whenever her initial strategies failed, refusing to give ground, even as exhaustion began creeping into her muscles. She managed to land a solid strike against his shoulder at one point, drawing a flicker of surprise across his otherwise composed expression, but Kale recovered instantly, countering with a move that swept her legs out from beneath her and sent her crashing to the ground. Before she could rise, he was there, one hand extended toward her, a genuine smile finally breaking through his usually guarded expression. "That was impressive," he said, helping her back to her feet. "Better than I expected, honestly." Elena took his offered hand, ignoring the warmth that spread through her palm at the contact, focusing instead on catching her breath after the demanding match. "You are stronger than I expected too," she admitted, a genuine smile of her own spreading across her face despite the ache settling into her muscles. The warriors around them broke into scattered applause and murmured praise, clearly impressed by the display they had just witnessed. Elena felt a swell of pride at their reaction, a feeling she had not experienced in longer than she cared to admit. "You have earned a place among my warriors," Kale announced to the gathered group, his voice carrying enough authority that no one dared question the declaration. "Elena will train alongside you from this point forward, treated with the same respect as any member of this pack." The formal acknowledgement struck Elena more deeply than she expected, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, despite her determination not to show such vulnerability in front of the assembled warriors. She had spent years earning her place within her old pack, only to have it stripped away in a single devastating moment. Here, within a fraction of the time, Kale had offered her something that felt more genuine than anything she had experienced before. "Thank you," she said quietly, meeting his gray eyes directly. "I will not disappoint you." "I do not doubt that," Kale said, something warm flickering behind his usually guarded expression, before he turned back toward the rest of the warriors, resuming his role as alpha overseeing the training session. Over the following weeks, Elena settled more deeply into the rhythm of life within Ashwood territory. She trained each morning alongside the other warriors, gradually earning their trust and friendship through consistent effort and genuine care for the pack's well-being. In the evenings, she often found herself sharing quiet conversations with Kale, discussions that began as simple updates on her progress, but slowly expanded into deeper territory, touching on their respective histories, their views on leadership, and the quiet philosophies that guided their approach to life. Elena learned, through these conversations, that Kale had led Ashwood Pack since a young age, thrust into the role of alpha earlier than most, due to circumstances he rarely discussed in detail. She sensed a deep well of loneliness beneath his composed exterior, a solitude that seemed to run parallel to her own recent experiences, though she did not yet understand its full source. "You carry yourself like someone who has survived something difficult," Elena observed one evening, as they sat together on the porch of his home overlooking the training grounds, the stars beginning to emerge across the darkening sky. Kale was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Everyone carries something," he said finally, his voice carrying a careful neutrality that told Elena he was not yet ready to share more. She did not push further, respecting the same boundary he had once respected for her. Instead, she simply sat beside him in comfortable silence, watching the stars multiply across the darkening sky, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over her that she had not experienced in longer than she could remember. Whatever burden Cale carried, whatever loneliness shaped the guarded walls around his heart, Elena found herself increasingly curious to understand it, and increasingly aware that her feelings toward this quiet, steady alpha were beginning to shift into something she had not expected to feel again so soon after the devastation of her broken engagement. She pushed the thought aside for now, unwilling to examine it too closely, while so much of her own healing remained incomplete. But as the weeks continued to pass, and her bond with Cale and his pack continued to deepen, Elena found it increasingly difficult to ignore the quiet warmth blooming steadily within her chest each time his gray eyes met hers across the training field, or the quiet porch where they now regularly shared their evenings together. The changing seasons brought a new rhythm to Elena's life within Ashwood territory. Autumn settled over the forest surrounding the packlands, painting the trees in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, and Elena found herself settling just as fully into her new role among the warriors who had become her closest companions. She grew particularly close to Rowan, who treated her with the easy camaraderie of a true friend, and to a warrior named Talia, whose sharp wit and fierce loyalty reminded Elena somewhat of her own sister back home. Together, the three of them formed a tight bond, often training together, sharing meals, and spending quiet evenings recounting stories from their respective pasts. It was during one such evening, gathered around a fire with several other warriors after a long day of training, that Elena finally opened up about the events that had led her to leave her old pack. She had avoided the subject for weeks, uncertain how her new companions might react to the humiliating story of her abandonment at the altar. But surrounded by people who had shown her nothing but genuine acceptance, she finally found the courage to share the truth. The reaction was immediate and fierce. Talia's expression darkened with outrage on Elena's behalf, while Rowan muttered something under his breath about the poor judgment of any alpha who would humiliate his intended mate so publicly. The other warriors gathered around the fire offered similar sympathy, their genuine anger at the injustice Elena had suffered, providing a healing balm to wounds she had carried silently for months. "He does not deserve the title of Alpha if he treats people that way," Talia said firmly, her hand resting supportively on Elena's shoulder. "You are better off free of him, even if the path here was painful." "I am starting to believe that," Elena admitted, surprised by how true the words felt as she spoke them aloud. "I do not think I fully understood how unhappy I truly was until I found myself somewhere different." The conversation continued late into the night, warriors sharing their own stories of hardship and resilience, creating a sense of shared understanding that deepened Elena's connection to her new pack even further. She noticed Cale standing at the edge of the gathering for a portion of the evening, listening quietly, without joining the conversation directly, his expression carrying a complicated mixture of sympathy and something else Elena could not quite identify. Later that night, after most of the warriors had retired for the evening, Elena found herself walking alone along the edge of the training grounds, her mind still processing the conversation from earlier. She was surprised when Cale's familiar figure appeared beside her, matching her pace without a word. "I heard part of your story tonight," he said finally, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "I am sorry you experienced something so painful." Elena glanced at him, appreciating the sincerity in his voice. "Thank you." It felt good to finally share it with people who understood. Cale was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the path ahead of them. "I understand more than you might realize," he said eventually, his voice carrying a weight that immediately caught Elena's attention. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, and Elena sensed him wrestling with whether to share something he had long kept hidden. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. "Years ago, before I became alpha of this pack, I had an intended mate. A bond formed between us during our youth, one that everyone believed would eventually lead to a formal union." Elena listened carefully, sensing the significance of what he was sharing. "She left," Cale continued, his voice carrying old pain beneath its steady surface. "Not through betrayal exactly, but through choice. She was offered a position within a more powerful pack, an opportunity that would have been foolish to refuse. She chose that opportunity over our bond, and I was left to rebuild my understanding of loyalty and connection almost entirely on my own. I am sorry, Elena said softly, understanding now the source of the careful walls he kept around his heart. That must have been incredibly difficult. It taught me caution, Cale admitted. I built my leadership around ensuring my pack would never suffer from the kind of instability that comes from personal weakness. I convinced myself that solitude was simply part of the price of strong leadership. Elena considered his words carefully, recognizing echoes of her own recent experience within his story, though the specific circumstances differed significantly. Do you still believe that? She asked quietly. That solitude is necessary? Cale turned to look at her directly, his gray eyes holding an intensity that made her breath catch slightly. I am beginning to question that belief, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, more than I have in years. The weight of his words settled between them, charged with meaning, neither of them seemed quite ready to fully acknowledge. Elena felt her heart racing, uncertain how to respond to the vulnerability he had just shown her, uncertain also of the growing warmth she felt toward this careful, guarded man who had saved her life and offered her a place among his people without expecting anything in return. Thank you for trusting me with that, she said finally, choosing honesty over avoidance. It means more to me than you probably realize. Cale nodded, a small, genuine smile touching his lips despite the vulnerability still evident in his expression. You have a way of making people want to trust you, he said. It is a rare quality. They continued walking together in comfortable silence after that, the shared vulnerability between them creating a new layer of connection that Elena had not anticipated when she first arrived in Ashwood territory, wounded and desperate for safety. What had begun as simple survival had slowly transformed into something far more meaningful, a genuine friendship built on mutual respect and understanding that neither of them had expected to find again after the wounds inflicted by their respective pasts. Over the following weeks, their conversations continued to deepen, weaving together into a steady, growing bond that neither of them rushed nor forced. Elena found herself looking forward to their evening discussions with an eagerness she had not felt in longer than she cared to admit, appreciating the way Cale listened carefully to everything she shared, offering thoughtful responses rather than empty platitudes. She noticed, too, the subtle ways he began looking out for her well-being beyond simple hospitality, ensuring she had proper equipment for training, checking in personally whenever she pushed herself too hard during practice sessions, and making a point of including her in important pack discussions, despite her status as a relatively recent addition to their community. The other warriors noticed the shift as well, exchanging knowing glances whenever Cale and Elena found reasons to seek each other out during the day, though no one commented directly, respecting the careful, unhurried nature of whatever was developing between their alpha and the outsider who had earned her place among them through determination and genuine character. Elena tried not to examine her growing feelings too closely, mindful of how recently her heart had been shattered by another alpha's betrayal. But despite her caution, she found it increasingly difficult to deny the warmth that bloomed within her chest each time Cale's gray eyes met hers, or the steady sense of safety and belonging she felt whenever she was in his presence, a feeling entirely different from the anxious uncertainty that had characterized much of her relationship with Damon. Whatever was forming between them, Elena sensed it was built on a foundation far sturdier than anything she had known before, rooted not in fate or obligation, but in genuine choice, mutual respect, and the slow, careful trust of two people who had each survived their own private heartbreaks and were only now beginning to consider the possibility of healing together. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing the Ashwood territory in a thick layer of snow that transformed the familiar landscape into something quiet and pristine. Training sessions grew shorter as the days darkened earlier, and the pack settled into the closer, warmer rhythms that the cold season demanded. Elena found herself drawn increasingly into the daily operations of the pack, beyond simple training, offering insights from her years of experience within her old territory's council meetings, insights that Cale welcomed with genuine appreciation. She helped negotiate a small trade agreement with a neighboring settlement, using diplomatic skills she had developed long before her failed engagement, and the success of the arrangement earned her further respect among the pack's senior members. "You have a gift for this kind of work," Kale told her one evening, after she successfully resolved a minor dispute between two pack families over grazing rights for their livestock. "I do not know how we managed such matters before you arrived." "You managed just fine," Elena said, though she could not hide the pride his praise sparked within her. "I am simply grateful to have found a place where my skills are actually valued." "They were not valued before?" Kale asked, curiosity evident in his tone. Elena hesitated, memories of her old life surfacing more easily now than they once had. "I contributed to plenty of important matters within my old pack," she said carefully. "But I always felt as though my worth was tied primarily to my future role as Luna, rather than to anything I accomplished on my own merit. Once that future disappeared, I am not certain anyone would have remembered the rest." Kale's expression grew thoughtful, and Elena sensed him considering her words carefully. "That is a narrow way to measure someone's value," he said finally. "You bring far more to a community than simply the title you might hold." The comment settled warmly within Elena's chest. Another small piece of the confidence she had lost during her humiliation, slowly rebuilding itself through the genuine appreciation shown by her new pack. She found herself smiling more easily these days, laughing freely during shared meals with Talia and Rowan, feeling herself transform gradually from the broken woman who had stumbled bleeding into Ashwood territory months earlier, into someone stronger, more certain of her own worth. It was during this same period that a new threat began stirring at the edges of Ashwood territory, forcing Elena and the rest of the pack to set aside their quieter concerns in favor of more pressing matters. Reports began arriving of increased rogue wolf activity along the northern borders, packs of displaced wolves banding together in desperate groups, raiding smaller settlements for resources, as winter tightened its grip on the region. Kale called an emergency council meeting to address the growing concern, and Elena found herself included among the senior advisors gathered to discuss potential strategies. The atmosphere in the room carried a tension that reminded Elena uncomfortably of the political meetings she had once attended within her old pack, though the stakes here felt more immediate, more personal, given how deeply she had come to care for the people gathered around the table. "We cannot simply wait for them to attack directly," Talia argued, her voice sharp with concern. "If they are targeting smaller settlements already, it is only a matter of time before they turn their attention toward Ashwood territory itself." "Agreed," Kale said, his expression grave as he studied the map spread across the table before them, marked with recent reports of rogue wolf sightings. "We need to establish stronger patrols along our borders and reach out to neighboring packs about potential coordination." Elena studied the map carefully, an idea forming as she considered the patterns marked across its surface. "The rogue groups seem to be moving in a predictable pattern," she observed, tracing the marked locations with her finger. "If we can anticipate their next likely target, we might be able to intercept them before they reach any settlement at all, rather than simply reacting after damage has already been done." Kale studied the pattern she indicated, his expression sharpening with interest. "That is a solid strategy," he said. "Elena, would you be willing to help coordinate this effort alongside our senior warriors?" "Of course," Elena said without hesitation, a surge of purpose settling firmly within her chest. She had spent months healing, training, and slowly rebuilding her confidence within Ashwood territory. Now, faced with a genuine threat to the community that had become her home, she felt ready to prove her value in a way that went beyond simple training exercises. Over the following days, Elena worked closely alongside Kale and the senior warriors, developing a coordinated defense strategy that balanced strengthened patrols along vulnerable border areas with careful diplomatic outreach to neighboring packs who might be persuaded to share resources and information regarding the rogue wolf movements. The work was demanding, consuming long hours that often stretched late into the night, but Elena found a deep satisfaction in contributing meaningfully to the safety of the community that had welcomed her so completely. She and Kale spent considerable time together during this period, their partnership extending naturally from the strategic planning sessions into quieter moments of mutual support, as the pressure of the looming threat weighed on both of them. Elena noticed how naturally they worked together, anticipating each other's thoughts during planning discussions, offering complementary strengths that made their combined efforts more effective than either could have managed alone. One particularly late evening, after a lengthy strategy session that stretched well past midnight, Elena found herself alone with Kale in the quiet study where they had been reviewing border reports. Exhaustion weighed heavily on both of them, but neither seemed eager to end the conversation and retreat to their separate quarters. "You have been invaluable through all of this," Kale said, setting aside the map he had been studying to look at her directly. "I do not think I have properly thanked you for everything you have contributed since your arrival." "You already thanked me plenty of times," Elena said, a small smile touching her lips despite her exhaustion. "Though I appreciate the sentiment regardless." Kale studied her for a long moment, something warm and unguarded flickering behind his gray eyes. "I mean it more deeply than simple gratitude for strategic assistance," he said quietly. "Since you arrived, this pack has changed in ways I did not expect. You have brought something to this community that was missing before, something I cannot quite put into simple words." Elena's heart raced at the sincerity in his voice, the careful vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to show so openly. "What are you trying to say, Kale?" He hesitated, and for a moment Elena thought he might retreat back behind his usual careful walls. Instead, he took a slow breath and continued, his voice steady despite the evident nervousness beneath his words. "I am saying that you have become important to me, in ways that extend beyond simple gratitude or respect for your contributions to this pack. I have spent years convincing myself that solitude was the safer path, that connection only led to eventual loss. But since you arrived, I find myself questioning everything I believed about that." Elena felt her breath catch, uncertain how to respond to the depth of vulnerability he was offering her. "I feel the same way," she admitted finally, the words emerging with quiet honesty. "I did not expect to find anything like this again, especially not so soon after everything that happened with Damon. But being here, with you, with this pack, has given me something I did not know I was still capable of feeling." The space between them seemed to shrink as they both leaned slightly closer, the weight of months of careful, unhurried connection finally reaching a natural culmination. Elena felt her pulse racing as Kale reached out gently, his hand resting softly against her cheek, his gray eyes searching hers for any sign of hesitation. Finding none, he closed the remaining distance between them, and their lips met in a kiss that carried none of the anxious uncertainty that had characterized her relationship with Damon, but instead something steady, genuine, and entirely mutual. Elena melted into the moment, feeling months of careful healing finally converge into something that felt undeniably right, a connection chosen freely by both of them, rather than dictated by fate or circumstance. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Kale rested his forehead gently against hers, a genuine, unguarded smile spreading across his face. "I have wanted to do that for longer than I probably should admit," he said softly. "I am glad you finally did," Elena replied, laughing softly despite the emotion still swelling within her chest. Outside the window, snow continued falling steadily across the quiet Ashwood territory, and for the first time since the devastating humiliation of her wedding day, Elena felt genuinely, completely certain that she had found exactly where she was meant to be. News of the growing bond between Elena and Kale spread quickly through the Ashwood pack, met with widespread approval from the community that had watched their careful, steady connection develop over the preceding months. Talia teased Elena mercilessly about the change, while Rowan simply offered a knowing grin whenever the subject arose, having apparently anticipated the outcome long before Elena herself had fully acknowledged her feelings. The threat of the rogue wolf attacks continued to occupy much of the pack's attention throughout the following weeks, and Elena threw herself fully into the coordinated defense efforts alongside Kale, their partnership growing stronger, both professionally and personally, as they worked to protect the community they both cared for deeply. The strengthened patrols and strategic anticipation of rogue movements proved effective, successfully intercepting 2 separate raiding attempts before any real damage could occur, earning widespread relief and gratitude from the pack members who had feared for their safety. As the immediate threat began to subside, Elena found herself settling more fully into her new life. The anxious uncertainty of her early days within Ashwood territory, replaced by a steady, growing confidence in her place within the pack, and in her relationship with Kale. They spent their evenings together whenever their responsibilities allowed, sharing meals, quiet conversations, and the simple comfort of each other's company that Elena had once believed she might never experience again after the devastation of her broken engagement. It was during this period of relative peace that unexpected news arrived, carried by a traveling messenger who requested an audience with Cale regarding matters from Elena's former pack. Elena felt her stomach tighten with dread the moment she heard the news, old wounds threatening to resurface despite the healing she had experienced over the preceding months. The messenger, a young wolf who introduced himself nervously as Corin, explained that he had been sent by Elena's own pack council, though not at the request of Damon or Vanessa. Instead, the message came from Elena's sister Marisol, who had apparently grown concerned about developments within their old territory that she believed Elena needed to know about. "Your sister asked me to deliver this personally," Corin explained, handing Elena a sealed letter. "She said it was important that you receive accurate information rather than rumors that might reach you through less reliable channels." Elena accepted the letter with trembling hands, retreating to a quiet corner of the pack's main hall to read its contents privately, while Cale remained nearby, sensing her need for space while still offering silent support through his steady presence. The letter revealed troubling developments within Elena's old pack. Marisol wrote that tensions had grown significantly between Damon and Vanessa's respective territories since their bonding ceremony, disputes over resources and authority, creating friction that threatened to destabilize the fragile alliance their union had originally been intended to strengthen. More troubling still, Marisol revealed that whispers had begun circulating regarding Vanessa's loyalty, questions about whether her bond with Damon had been genuine or simply a calculated maneuver designed to weaken his territory's standing among neighboring packs. Elena read the letter twice, processing the implications carefully. Despite everything Damon had done to her, she felt no satisfaction in learning of his current troubles, only a quiet, distant concern for the pack members she had once called family, people who bore no responsibility for their alpha's poor judgment, yet would inevitably suffer the consequences of any instability within their leadership. The final paragraph of the letter, however, carried news that struck Elena with unexpected force. Marisol wrote that Damon had begun making inquiries about Elena's whereabouts, apparently believing that reconciling with her might help stabilize his weakening position, both politically and personally, as his bond with Vanessa continued to show signs of strain. Elena set the letter down carefully, her hands no longer trembling with old grief, but instead with something closer to disbelief. After everything Damon had done, after the humiliation he had inflicted upon her in front of their entire community, he now believed he could simply reclaim her when his own poor choices had led him into difficulty. She shared the contents of the letter with Cale later that evening, watching his expression grow increasingly tense as she recounted Marisol's warnings. "He believes he can simply come find you and expect reconciliation," Cale said, his voice carrying a controlled anger that Elena had rarely witnessed from him before. "After everything he put you through." "It sounds that way," Elena confirmed, her own emotions a complicated tangle of lingering resentment and quiet, steady resolve. "Though I have no intention of allowing that to happen, whatever difficulties he is facing now are entirely of his own making." Cale reached for her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "You will not face him alone if he does come here," he said firmly. "Ashwood territory will protect you, and I will protect you personally, regardless of what claims he believes he still holds over your future." Elena felt a wave of gratitude wash over her at his words, appreciating the steady, unwavering support he offered without hesitation. "Thank you," she said softly, "though I believe I am strong enough now to face him myself, if it comes to that. I am no longer the woman who stood helplessly at that altar, unable to do anything but watch her future crumble in front of an entire pack." "No," Cale agreed, studying her with evident pride and affection, "you certainly are not." Elena's prediction proved accurate sooner than either of them expected. Less than 2 weeks after Corin's message arrived, a scout reported unfamiliar wolves approaching the southern border of Ashwood territory, requesting formal audience with the pack's alpha regarding a matter of personal importance. Elena felt her pulse quicken the moment she heard the description of the lead visitor, recognizing immediately who had finally arrived at the edge of the territory she now called home. Cale called for a formal gathering within the main hall, ensuring that Elena would not need to face this confrontation without the full support of the pack that had become her family. Elena dressed carefully that morning, choosing clothing that reflected her current status as a respected member of the Ashwood community, rather than anything reminiscent of her old life, determined to face Damon not as the broken woman he had abandoned, but as the strong, capable person she had rebuilt herself into during her months within Ashwood territory. When Damon finally entered the main hall, flanked by two of his personal guards, Elena felt a flicker of the old anxiety stir within her chest, but it settled quickly, replaced by a steady, calm resolve that surprised her with its strength. Damon's eyes found her immediately across the room, and something in his expression shifted, surprise mixed with what looked almost like relief. "Elena," he said, stepping forward before Cale's raised hand halted his progress. "You will address the alpha of this territory first," Cale said, his voice carrying a quiet authority that left no room for argument. "This is Ashwood land, and proper protocol will be observed." Damon's jaw tightened, clearly unaccustomed to such direct challenge to his authority, but he offered a stiff, formal greeting toward Cale, before turning his attention back toward Elena. "I have come a long way to find you," he said. "I did not expect it would take this long to locate you." "I did not make it a secret," Elena said, her voice steady and clear, carrying across the silent hall. "I simply was not particularly interested in being found, especially not by you." A murmur passed through the gathered Ashwood pack members, clearly impressed by the strength in Elena's response. Damon's expression flickered with something like embarrassment before he composed himself, straightening his posture as he attempted to regain control of the conversation. "Things have not gone as expected since our separation," he admitted, his tone carrying an edge of desperation Elena had never heard from him before. "I believe we made a mistake, Elena. I would like the opportunity to discuss reconciliation, to consider what a future together might look like now that circumstances have changed." The words hung in the air, and Elena felt every eye in the room turn toward her, waiting to see how she would respond to the man who had once shattered her heart so publicly, now standing before her seeking to reclaim what he had so carelessly discarded. Elena let the silence stretch for a long moment, allowing Damon to fully absorb the weight of standing before her without the certainty of an answer he clearly expected to receive easily. She studied him carefully, noting the changes months of political struggle had etched into his once confident bearing. He looked tired, his shoulders carrying a tension that had never been present during their years together, and for a fleeting moment, Elena felt an echo of the old affection she once held for him. But that echo passed quickly, replaced by a clear, unwavering understanding of everything that had happened since that devastating day in the ceremonial grove. "You believe things have changed simply because your bond with Vanessa is proving difficult," Elena said finally, her voice calm and measured despite the weight of the moment. "You did not come here because you regret what you did to me. You came here because you need something to stabilize your position, and you believed I might still be available to serve that purpose." Damon's expression tightened, clearly uncomfortable with how precisely Elena had identified his true motivations. "That is not entirely fair," he said, though his tone lacked real conviction. "I have thought of you often since you left. I recognize now the mistake I made." "The mistake you made," Elena repeated, allowing a hint of the old pain to surface briefly in her voice, before pushing it firmly aside. "You did not simply make a mistake, Damon. You humiliated me in front of everyone I had ever trusted. You let me stand at that altar in my wedding dress, while you chose another woman in the cruelest possible way. And you did not offer a single word of genuine apology until your own circumstances became inconvenient." The gathered Ashwood pack members remained silent, watching the exchange with rapt attention, though Elena could sense their support radiating around her, a steady presence that gave her the confidence to speak without hesitation or fear. "I am sorry," Damon said, and for a moment, something in his voice sounded almost genuine. "I handled everything poorly. I understand that now." "Perhaps you do," Elena said. "But understanding now, only after your own choices led you into difficulty, does not erase what happened. It does not restore the trust you destroyed, and it certainly does not create any obligation on my part to return to a life I have since rebuilt into something far better than what I left behind." Damon's eyes flickered toward Cale, who stood close beside Elena throughout the exchange, his presence steady and protective without ever overstepping into the conversation that belonged entirely to Elena herself. Understanding seemed to settle over Damon's features as he studied the dynamic between them, the easy trust and quiet affection evident in every subtle interaction. "I see," Damon said finally, his voice carrying a mixture of resignation and something almost like respect. "You have found someone new." "I have found someone who values me completely, without condition, without hesitation," Elena said, glancing briefly toward Cale, before returning her full attention to Damon. "Someone who saved my life when I arrived here broken and alone, and who has shown me, every single day since, exactly what genuine partnership looks like. You could never offer me that, Damon, and I understand now that you likely never could have, regardless of how our engagement might have concluded." The words carried a quiet finality that seemed to settle the matter completely, both for Elena and for everyone gathered within the hall. Damon's shoulders slumped slightly, the last of his hopeful expectation draining away, as the reality of Elena's complete transformation became undeniable. "I wish you happiness," he said finally, his voice quiet and genuine, for perhaps the first time since he had entered the hall. "Whatever I failed to give you, I hope you have found it here." "I have," Elena said simply, no longer feeling the need for further explanation or justification. "Thank you for coming, though I do not believe there is anything further to discuss." Damon nodded slowly, understanding the conversation had reached its natural conclusion. He turned to offer a formal, respectful farewell to Cale, acknowledging the Ashwood Alpha's authority with a sincerity that suggested genuine humility rather than mere political necessity. Cale accepted the gesture with quiet grace, and moments later, Damon and his guards departed from the hall, leaving behind the territory and the woman he had once so carelessly discarded. A collective breath seemed to release throughout the room once Damon's presence had fully departed, tension easing as the Ashwood pack members began murmuring among themselves, clearly impressed by the strength and clarity Elena had displayed throughout the difficult confrontation. Talia rushed forward first, wrapping Elena in a fierce embrace, followed quickly by Rowan and several other warriors who had become close friends during her months within the territory. "You handled that perfectly," Talia said, pulling back to study Elena's face with evident pride. "I do not think I have ever seen someone dismiss a former alpha with such calm confidence." Elena laughed softly, feeling a genuine lightness settle over her chest that she had not experienced since long before the disaster of her wedding day. "It felt good," she admitted. "Better than I expected, honestly. I thought seeing him again might reopen old wounds, but instead, it simply confirmed how far I have come since then." Cale remained close beside her throughout the celebration that followed, his hand finding hers as the pack members gradually dispersed back to their regular duties, the excitement of the confrontation slowly settling into satisfied conversation and renewed appreciation for the woman who had proven herself, once again, to be exactly the kind of person their community valued deeply. "I am proud of you," Cale said quietly, once they finally found a moment of privacy away from the celebratory crowd. "You faced him with more grace and strength than I believe I could have managed in your position." "I had good reason to feel strong," Elena said, meeting his gray eyes with genuine warmth. "I had an entire pack standing beside me, and I had you. That made all the difference." Cale pulled her gently into an embrace, and Elena melted into the familiar comfort of his arms, feeling the last remaining traces of her old grief finally dissolve completely, replaced entirely by the steady, genuine happiness she had found within Ashwood territory. Whatever fear she had carried regarding Damon's return had proven unfounded, overshadowed entirely by the confidence and security she had built for herself over the preceding months. "Whatever happens next," Cale said softly, his forehead resting gently against hers, "I want you to know that this is where you belong. Not because circumstances forced you here, but because you chose it, and because I choose you, completely and without hesitation, every single day." Elena felt tears gathering at the corners of her eyes, though these carried none of the pain that had accompanied her tears months earlier at the edge of the ceremonial grove. These tears carried only gratitude, joy, and a certainty she had never expected to feel again after the devastation of her broken engagement. "I choose you too," she whispered, closing the remaining distance between them for a kiss that sealed the promise they had both been building toward since the night he found her broken and bleeding at the edge of his territory, offering her a second chance at a life far better than anything she had lost. Spring arrived gently over Ashwood territory, melting away the last remnants of winter snow and coaxing new growth from the earth that had lain dormant through the colder months. Elena stood at the edge of the training field one morning, watching the first blossoms appear on the trees surrounding the packlands, and felt a profound sense of peace settle over her, so different from the anxious uncertainty that had once defined her days. It had been nearly a year since she first stumbled, wounded and broken, into this territory, carrying nothing but grief and a fragile hope for something better. In that time, she had rebuilt herself completely, earning respect among the Ashwood warriors, contributing meaningfully to the safety and prosperity of the community, and finding a love with Cale that felt nothing like the anxious uncertainty she had once mistaken for devotion during her years with Damon. Cale found her there among the blossoming trees, his expression carrying a nervous energy that immediately caught her attention. "You seem unusually quiet this morning," Elena observed, studying him curiously. "I have something I would like to discuss with you," Cale said, taking her hand gently, as he guided her toward a quiet clearing at the edge of the forest, a place they often visited during their evening walks together. "Something I have been considering for quite some time now." Elena felt her heart quicken with anticipation as they walked together, sensing the significance of whatever Cale intended to share. When they reached the clearing, he turned to face her fully, his gray eyes carrying an intensity and vulnerability that reminded her of the night he had first shared the painful story of his own past heartbreak. "Elena," he began, his voice steady despite the evident emotion beneath his words, "since you arrived in this territory, everything has changed for me. I spent years convincing myself that solitude was simply the price of strong leadership, that connection only led inevitably to loss. But you proved that belief wrong, every single day, through your strength, your kindness, and your unwavering commitment to this pack and to me." He knelt slowly before her, and Elena felt her breath catch as understanding dawned fully. "I do not want a bond built on fate or circumstance," Cale continued. "I want a partnership built entirely on choice, the same way everything between us has developed since the night I found you in that forest. Elena, will you choose to become my mate, my equal, and the Luna of this pack, not because destiny demands it, but because we have built something real together, through genuine trust and mutual respect?" Tears streamed freely down Elena's face as she absorbed the full weight of his words, memories of her devastating humiliation at her previous wedding surfacing briefly before being overwhelmed entirely by the pure joy of this moment, so different from anything she had experienced before. This was not a ceremony built on assumption or public spectacle. This was a genuine question, asked privately, rooted in months of careful, deliberate partnership rather than empty promises made before an audience. "Yes," Elena said, her voice thick with emotion, as she pulled Cale back to his feet, wrapping her arms around him tightly. "Yes, I choose you, completely and without hesitation." Their bonding ceremony, when it finally took place weeks later, carried none of the grandeur or political weight that had characterized her previous failed wedding. Instead, it was an intimate gathering among the Ashwood pack, surrounded by the friends and community members who had witnessed her transformation from a broken, grieving woman into someone strong, confident, and genuinely happy. Talia and Rowan stood as witnesses, both beaming with pride, as Elena and Cale exchanged their vows beneath the same blossoming trees where Cale had first proposed. Elena wore a simple dress, far less elaborate than the gown she had worn during her failed wedding, but she had never felt more beautiful, more certain of the choice she was making. As she stood before Cale, surrounded by people who genuinely cared for her well-being, she felt none of the anxious uncertainty that had plagued her original wedding day. Instead, she felt only steady, complete confidence in the future they were building together. "I promise to stand beside you as an equal," Cale said, his voice carrying deep sincerity as he spoke his vows, "not as someone who simply leads while you follow, but as a true partner, someone who values your voice, your strength, and your wisdom as essential to everything we build together, both for ourselves and for this pack we both love." "I promise the same," Elena replied, her voice steady despite the emotion swelling within her chest. "I promise to bring my whole self to this partnership, holding nothing back, trusting completely in what we have built together, through genuine choice rather than obligation or fate." When they sealed their bond with a kiss, the gathered pack erupted into joyful celebration, the sound completely different from the shocked silence and forced applause that had marked her previous, failed ceremony. This celebration carried genuine happiness, shared freely by a community that had watched Elena's remarkable journey from devastation to genuine fulfillment. As the celebration continued late into the evening, Elena found a quiet moment to step away, standing at the edge of the gathering and looking back over everything that had led her to this point. She thought of the devastating humiliation she had experienced at Damon's hands, the painful decision to leave everything familiar behind, the terrifying journey through unknown territory, and the unexpected kindness of a guarded alpha who had saved her life and, in doing so, had ultimately saved her entire future. She realized, standing there beneath the stars with her new mate's laughter, carrying warmly across the celebration behind her, that her original wedding day, as painful as it had been, had ultimately given her the strength to walk away from a life that had never truly served her happiness. That devastating rejection, cruel as it had felt in the moment, had set her on a path towards something far more genuine and fulfilling than anything she would have found had Damon simply followed through with their original plans. Cale found her there moments later, wrapping his arms gently around her from behind, resting his chin softly against her shoulder as they both looked out over the celebration unfolding before them. "What are you thinking about?" he asked quietly. "I am thinking about how strange life can be," Elena said, leaning back into his warm embrace. "How the worst day of my life somehow led me exactly to where I was always meant to be." "I am grateful for whatever path brought you to me," Cale said softly, pressing a gentle kiss against her temple. "Regardless of how painful that path might have been." Elena turned within his embrace to face him fully, studying the man who had saved her life, healed her broken heart, and offered her a partnership built on genuine respect and mutual choice, rather than empty promises and public spectacle. "I am grateful too," she said, smiling up at him with complete, unguarded happiness. "You are the alpha who truly saved me, Cale. Not simply that night in the forest, but every single day since, through your patience, your respect, and your genuine love." They remained together at the edge of the celebration for a long while, watching the stars multiply across the clear spring sky, the warmth of the pack's joy surrounding them like a gentle embrace. Elena thought of Damon occasionally throughout the following years, though the memory gradually lost its power to wound her, transformed instead into a distant reminder of everything she had overcome to find her true place in the world. As Luna of Ashwood Pack, Elena dedicated herself fully to the community that had welcomed her when she had nothing, working alongside Cale to strengthen their territory, forge lasting alliances with neighboring packs, and build a legacy defined by genuine partnership rather than mere political convenience. Together, they faced challenges and celebrated triumphs, their bond growing steadily stronger through every experience they shared, rooted always in the same foundation of mutual respect and genuine choice that had defined their relationship from its very beginning. The woman who had once stood humiliated and broken at an altar, abandoned in front of everyone she trusted, had transformed completely into someone strong, respected, and deeply loved, standing as an equal beside the alpha, who had saved her life and helped her discover a happiness far greater than anything she had once believed she had lost. Elena had walked away from devastation and found, against all expectation, exactly where she was always meant to belong.